Thank you very much. Welcome to the second of our weekly webinars. Fortunately, you won't be listening to me this week. Lucky you, you'll be listening to Sam Coombs instead. And I'll introduce Sam in just a second. We're putting on these webinars at Kieser Australia because we really strongly believe in the role that physical activity is going to play in the health of our country over the next couple of months. And we know that many of you who are clients of ours or who are just out there being active are lovers of running. And we're also lovers of running. So I wanted to put this slide up to give you a bit of demonstration of that. I'll introduce Sam in a minute, and that third photo from the left-hand side is a photo of Sam from the Surf Coast Century last year. The photo on the right-hand side is Todd Scarce, who's the General Manager of all of Kieser in Victoria and one of Kieser Australia's directors. And that's Todd practicing what he preaches down at the Geelong Half Ironman. And on the far left-hand side of that screen is Paul Percy, who's the current marathon record holder for Kieser with a 2:58.59 in Helsinki, although this photo I think is taken from New York Marathon. And that black and white photo, second from the left, is me not from a running event, from an adventure race, Red Bull Defiance up in Mission Beach. So I could have picked 50 different photos from 50 different team members, but I think it's really important for all of you listening that you know that we do practice what we preach here at Kieser. So we're going to start tonight with a little bit of a poll just to get an idea about where everybody is at in their running career. So Carlo, I know you're there in the background. Would you be able to just turn that poll on for me so that, thank you very much, mate, so that can pop up on everyone's screen. We just wanted to just start with two questions, really simple. What's the top cause of running injuries? And we've just thrown up 4 potential answers for you there. And then the second is, how far do you run on most weeks? So we want to get a little bit of an idea of who we've got listening, what level of experience everybody's got. And turns out I'm allowed to vote this week. Carlo, that's fantastic. I wasn't allowed to vote last week. Thanks, mate. This also, for everybody, just gives us 2 or 3 minutes for everyone else to join, everyone who's putting children to bed, maybe coming back from their evening run. We're up to 57 participants at the moment, so there's still a few people slowly filtering in. We'll hold that poll open for 1 more minute, just to make sure that we can get as many results as possible. Sam, while we're waiting, when was your last run training session, mate?
Well, last one was on the weekend. I've been building up, actually coming back from my own injury, from a back injury. Just come back from a long cycling trip that went to New Zealand, so being in that flex position wasn't great for me, but we're back up and running, and we did 12 Ks on the weekend.
Sam, when you say a small cycling trip in New Zealand, do you want to give everybody just a little bit of context about what a small cycling trip involves for you?
Yeah, so it was 3,000 Ks over 17 days. So it's an ultra cycling event called Tour Aotearoa. So you can kind of pick your pace and you're really racing yourself. So you kind of decide how far and how fast you're going to go each day. But yeah, banged it out 17 days.
That's very, very impressive. And the fact that you're back run training after that is even more impressive. So Carlo, 7 by my watch, can you end that poll for me and just display the results up on screen? Fantastic. Now, hopefully everybody can now see those results as well. For those who can't, because I'm never 100% confident in this technology, the top cause of running injury, 71% of us said that training errors were the #1 cause of running injuries, and 24% of us said that previously having an injury was the #1 cause. And how far do you run most weeks. And I think this one's a really good one for you and I, Sam, going through tonight. 0 to 10 kilometers, 39%. So we probably won't be talking heaps about Sam and his Surf Coast century or his 3,000 kilometer cycling trip from one end of New Zealand to the other. But there is 10% of people here who are completing over 40 kilometers a week. So I reckon I probably fit into that category at the moment, Sam, because the only thing I can do to keep me sane up here in Bondi is to go for a run around the harbour. So I'm going to close that off, and I'm going to just give a quick introduction to Sam, whom he says by his own admission isn't really a runner, just got conned into it by his darling partner.
That's right.
But apparently, well, I think for a guy who's not really a runner, Sam's doing a pretty good job. And he did compete in Surf Coast Century last year, which is why I keep referring to that, because I think it was probably his most recent event. But Sam's also a physiotherapist for Kieser at Kieser Collins St. And as many of you can imagine, there's plenty of runners getting around Melbourne CBD when it's up and running, quite a few running groups. And so Sam's run presentations like this for us and for the Melbourne CBD community previously. And given the unusual times that we find ourselves in, we thought this was a great opportunity to be able to bring Sam, his expertise and his experience to a much bigger audience. So to Simon, the South African listening in London, through to Katie, who's possibly still down on the farm, right through to Iris, the Dutch girl who's listening in Bondi at the moment. Sam, I'm handing over to you. Thank you very much for this evening, and I look forward to hearing the truth about running injuries, mate.
Beautiful. Thanks very much for that intro, Tim, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. It's really good to see these numbers coming through. So I'm sure with everyone listening, you know, there's going to be different reasons for why you're tuning in today and why you really enjoy running. So some people, it's going to be getting those fitness and health benefits. For some people like Tim, it might be just it's a bit of a stress relief and a break from a busy or stressful day. For others, it's meditative, and for some, it's a way of pursuing their athletic endeavors and try to push themselves. So for whatever your reason, the big thing I want to start looking at for our Kieser running community is really trying to change our ideas or put some focus on injury prevention to basically keep us running. That's my main goal. So as far as I go, I guess like Tim said, I don't class myself as a runner, but I kind of tick all those boxes. I do it for health benefits. I do it for the stress release. I do it for my fitness, but also for pushing myself athletically. And I'd almost say that I almost do it for self-transcendence. I look to push my own barriers and my own perceived limits, overcoming that with whatever barriers come along the race. And then I use that framework as in other parts of my life and other pursuits. So for me, it's quite integral to my personality and how I tackle things. So with this current crisis and climate at the moment, I know some people are under the pump and some people have a lot more time on their hands. And what I'm seeing anecdotally around places like Princess Park is a lot more people hitting the pavement to try and get their exercise in. And for me as a physiotherapist and a runner, this is actually really, really exciting because I know that the health benefits that come from running far outweigh the risks of injury. But that said, I know this will be the limiting factor for a lot of people. So looking at that poll, I'm sure a lot of you probably fit within one category of these. So, you know, people that are looking to start up running after having a significant rest. Those who already have some form of running base, but they're looking to build their mileage in this time. And then you've got more of the athletic population that may see this spare time on their hands as a potential opportunity to get a couple extra training sessions in there and maybe take themselves to that next level. So I want to kind of address some misconceptions today, and that's going to be the topic of our talk, as I really believe that misconceptions can be drivers for injuries and they can be the vehicle of injuries. So if we think about concepts, they're really how we navigate the world. And if we have a misconception, it can lead us down the wrong path. So missing what is relevant when it comes to injury prevention, or potentially leading us to drive a behavior that's potentially deleterious to us or can increase our risk of injury, which is definitely what I want to avoid. So the aim of talk is to use the science today to bust some of those myths and to give you a bit of direction in what we need to focus on and what is most important when we look at injury prevention for the longevity of our running. So it was actually quite tough to pick the 5 myths that I was going to choose today. So I've gone to the research as well as using my own experience. Saragito in 2014 did a really cool qualitative analysis where they looked at do recreational runners, or the title was do recreational runners think about risk factors for running injuries. So they sat down with 95 participants between the ages of 17 and 95, and they kind of dug out what are their views on what are the factors, a bit like our poll at the start. And I think you guys are probably onto it a little bit better probably than the research shows us. So their top factors they pulled out were 1, not stretching enough, 2, wearing the wrong shoes, 3, excessive training, so the other training areas that 74% of you chose today, lack of strength, which is another good one, and not warming up. So I've taken those top 5 and blended that in with my own clinical experience to delve out our topics for today. So myths we're going to bust. First one, soft surfaces. So this wasn't in the research, but something that commonly comes up in clinic. Soft surfaces are better for me, better for my joints, blah, blah. Number 2, I got an injury because I didn't stretch beforehand. Now, I thought this was long and dead. I thought this one had been put to bed years ago, but it does seem to rear its ugly head every now and again. So I want to put that one hopefully to bed with everyone today, finally. 3, supportive or cushioning shoes help to prevent injuries. Number 4, running is supposed to be hard. And now this is actually my pet peeve. And I think if I could eliminate any misconception or paradigm out there, it's that running is supposed to be hard. And number 5, I don't need strength training if I'm running. So before I jump into the myths, I just want to give you for a second an idea of how my physio brain works when I'm either managing an injury or if you're coming into the clinic from an injury prevention point of view and you're looking to build a program around that. So when it comes to these things, we have to look and assess and address individual factors, intrinsic factors, and extrinsic factors. So factors external to us that influence our physiology. So to give you a bit of an example, some intrinsic factors could be tissue tolerance. So what's your capacity in your muscles, your bones, tendons, ligaments? What is your gender? Each gender has its own risk tolerance or risk profile for any one injury. Biomechanics, so with the way you move depends on which force or what forces go to what part of your body, therefore overloading certain structures or not, or spreading the load. Age, so with age you have to think for different people and different ages that certain things are more relevant than others when it comes to injury prevention, or you may be at a higher risk of certain injuries. Body mass index. Now, a few people ticked this in the poll that body mass index was a potential cause that weight was a potential risk factor, and it actually is. So BMI and the one below it, previous history of injury, are actually 2 of the 3 top biggest predictive factors for injury when looking at a large population. So this is the highest level of research that we have. So mobility is another factor. Can your joint move through a range of motion to allow you to do an efficient running cycle? And mindset, I think, is really underrated. So again, a bit like concepts, if we have the wrong mindset, that can lead to training errors, overloading and overreaching. Some extrinsic factors here. So we've got things like footwear that we're going to touch on today. We've got surface that we're going to touch on today. What surface are you running on? We've got training type or running training, so type, intensity, frequency. Okay, these are all factors that lead to, or potentially not done right, lead to training errors. This is number 3 of those top predictive factors. We've got stretching, which we'll touch on today. And I know this is one Tim wants to touch on as well. And then we've got strength training, one of the more important ones that I've put towards the end. And of course, being a key to this is where we can really make a difference.
Sam, I'm going to put to bed the stretching myth forever because I get very, very frustrated with everybody talking about stretching. You shouldn't bait me like that, Sam.
All right. I'll give you a chance when we get to that point and you can bring your points forward there, Tim. So let's start with soft surfaces. So running on grass is better for my joints. I hear this all the time. Or people just asking, hey Sam, I've got an injury, should I be running on grass? And that's a valid question to an extent. And I think where there's smoke, there's fire, but I want to look at that one a bit further. Running wears out my knees, or running on hard surfaces wears out my knees. That's another classic one. So when I looked at this, the first thing I wanted to look at was, what is the physics involved here? Now, a lot of the research that looks at what's called ground reaction force, I thought was the first point to look at, as this is pretty black and white. You can't really bend physics. So ground reaction force is the force of when your foot hits the ground, the reactive force going through your body. Now, there's a lot of literature on this, and I chose one to illustrate my point pretty clearly, and they looked at hard surfaces, so clay, intermediate surfaces, soft turf, and they looked at a soft surface of an athletics track. And what they found in the conclusion was there's actually very little difference between the ground reaction force of the hard through to the soft surfaces. The one caveat with that was that, of course, and logically, the force peaked a bit faster with the harder surface. So we can deduce from that, there's actually no difference overall, or very minimal difference in the force that goes through your leg or through your body as you're running on a hard surface versus soft surface. Now, what about that peak? Now, this is when Achilles don't like to change. So a change in surface, they will adapt to what they're used to. And tendons are probably one of our slowest tissues to adapt. They're avascular, and they take a long time. If you're used to running on a treadmill, you've got a little bit more spring in that treadmill. That doesn't translate to an Achilles that's happy running the same distance on a hard surface or on grass or another surface. So really important with things like Achilles that we're sticking with the same surface to account for the changes in the peak of that force. But we know that the force is the same throughout. So if we know the force is the same throughout, then how does that relate to wear and tear of joints? Because this is another classic one that I see. So with wear and tear of joints, we have to think something like osteoarthritis. It's actually not clear cut what causes this, and it's very individual. So we know it's likely a mix of biomechanical factors, hormonal and genetic factors involved, not just the force going through the knee. So if we know it's the same amount of force going through the knee, and we know there's multiple factors here, well, that almost busts the myth in itself. When it comes to some of the longitudinal studies, so looking at back to the 80s when kind of jogging started to become a big thing, all the way through to now, there's actually no longitudinal studies that are linking wear and tear or osteoarthritis to running, okay? So some of the more recent studies have even shown that a marathon running training program has actually been shown to increase muscular, tendon, and joint strength, and tendon health that relates to joint health, okay? So it's shown training actually can be effective in helping the joint. There's also been more recent studies come out that were looking at longitudinal studies, so lifetime marathon runners. And these are guys that have been running countless marathons. Now, when looking at these guys, looking at X-ray findings and looking at outcome measures of their symptoms, they had no problem or wear and tear in their knees. So if these are guys who are sustaining repetitive forces throughout their whole career and they don't have osteoarthritis, it would be a little bit naive to say that just running is related to that. Now, the good effects of running, we know things like there's research showing high levels of function in aging populations that do run, so it's directly correlated. And we know there's a huge body of evidence supporting exercise and especially in the case of knee osteoarthritis, and the benefits in pain management and disease progression. And this is easily seen through our GMHBA program run at Kieser, where very little people went through the surgery. So the bottom line is that majority of running injuries is not caused by running itself. And most likely it's down to the training era, as everyone rightly identified. And so doing too much too fast or overreaching. So I'm not denying that there is a biomechanical element to osteoarthritis, but it's very individual for the person. I think the most important thing is running should really be enjoyed pain-free or symptom-free. So best course of action and going back to basics or to conclude, sorry. So when starting out running, stick with the same surface. Okay, Achilles, don't like those changes. Hard surfaces, not inherently bad for you. There's no actually evidence to show that running alone causes wear and tear, let alone on a hard surface. And like any activity with the body, we need time to adapt. So having time to gradually expose yourself to a surface rather than jump straight into running 10Ks on hard packed grass compared to, hard packed pavement compared to grass is the way to go about it.
Sam, I'm just going to jump in with a question, and as I do, I'm lucky enough to have a microphone. No one else does, but if anyone does have a question tonight, down the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A function. Feel free to type your question in there. Carlo will moderate those questions for us, and Sam or maybe myself will jump in at the end and answer the question for you. But Sam, my question was, a lot of the people listening tonight run 0 to 10 kilometers a week. Some people might be looking at starting running. I know Jess Valduto is listening in, and she's about to start her running career aiming for City to Surf this year. So if you had a recommendation for those people, if they could either go to the oval and run on the grass, or they could go to the concrete walking path and they're starting from scratch, where should they start, Sam?
I think a big thing is really what is your end goal? Someone like Jess who's maybe aiming to do a road running race, I'd stick with that kind of surface. That's what you're really aiming towards. But it's not so much a choice of surface, I think, that is more important, but more the fact that we stick with that surface and we gradually expose ourselves to other surfaces if we're doing so.
Yeah, thank you. That's perfect. Well, Jess, the City to Surf is definitely run on the pavement. So tomorrow morning when you go for a run, stay away from the oval, head straight to the pavement and enjoy.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Sam.
So our next myth today is static stretching. And like I said, I thought this one was put to bed a long time ago, but seems to rear its head every now and again in the clinic. So I really wanted to knock it on the head. So a classic thing I hear is, I got injured, Sam. I think it was because I didn't stretch before I ran. So with static stretching, it's pretty simple, and I'll get through this one pretty quick. Some studies have shown that there's actually a decreased performance with static stretching when you are doing this directly before a run. So static stretching for up to an hour after that static stretch has been shown to decrease performance in the athletic population. There were some larger studies done looking at the difference between a stretching program pre-run and a non-stretching program, and this was with big populations in army studies. And in a 12-week follow-up, there was actually really no significant difference between the two camps that were stretching and those that were not stretching. So static stretching in particular, not exactly useful from a prevention point of view. We know there's potential deleterious effects to our performance if we're static stretching right before a run. And then if we think about post-run, there's been no evidence for improved recovery. So no effect on DOMs post-run as well in a lot of the literature. But I think the key thing to know is it's not going to be harmful. And probably something Tim wants to jump on there, but I think mobility is a really important part of a program, but it doesn't have to be achieved through static stretching. So if we jump into the best course of action, it's really dynamic activity initially. So those starting in that 0 to 10 category of kilometers, really you want to elevate your heart rate. Okay, it's doing some dynamic movements, it's doing some heel pumps, ankle pumps, it's doing some brisk walking, maybe starting off slow with your run and then building into it as you go. For the more athletic population, it's more going through a jog to start with, some drills, some movement patterns that are going to be mimicking running to warm up that movement pattern and then gauge yourself before you start the run. But the caveat being, I think mobility is important, and we're thinking economy of running, for you to move through a movement pattern is really, really important for best efficiency, but doesn't exactly have to be achieved through static stretching.
Sam, why, because I am pretty passionate about this, because I get frustrated when I've got clients I'm training for, be it a small run, right up to a marathon, and they tell me that they haven't stretched enough, and I'm really fighting hard to try and get them stronger because I know the evidence is so good about strength. Why do you reckon it is that people keep going back to stretching, even though you and I know the evidence is basically black and white now that static stretching isn't going to help you?
Well, I think it's pretty well ingrained in the culture at the moment, Tim, and I think previously that was thought to be best practice before really evidence caught up and said it's not. That's one part of it. I think there's a logical element to it where you think, if I feel tight, well, if I stretch my muscle, if I make it more pliable, that potentially that will lead to me having a decreased risk of injury. And that's, I think, it's the idea of the warm up and getting tissues more supple. But we know really when it comes to stretching, it's the nervous system that's going to have the biggest effect, and gradual exposure over a long period of time, as well as things like strength training to actually improve mobility. Things like core strength in particular can improve your leg mechanics and mobility. It can improve hamstring mobility as well, just through better recruitment of other muscle groups.
Yeah, I think I've reached a point of compromise with a few of my patients as well, Sam, where stretching, exactly as you just alluded to, has become part of the routine and has been part of the routine for so many years, that if it's acknowledged as it's there as part of the routine and it's something that someone does in their race preparation or even in their training preparation, because you and I both believe in how important mindset is for training, then I think that it can still play a role, and I am happy for it to be in there in someone's program to get them in the right headspace, as long as they understand that from a purely mechanical and physiological point of view, that it's probably not doing anything for them other than, maybe giving them 30 seconds of feeling good.
That's right. And I think if we are looking to do a program, that's an integral part, even doing it outside of running, at another time. But again, that comes down to a time factor too, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and even now, even these days where we've all got fairly limited time, and I dare say from what I can gather, if a lot of our runners are doing under 10 kilometers a week or 0 to 20 kilometers a week, their time would best be spent on getting in a few more kilometers, because there's definitely a volume, an element of protection from volume, or they'd be best doing some strength training as well. So I don't think anyone in this group needs to worry too much about stretching going forwards.
That's it. And then it's really what is more relevant to you, isn't it, Tim? And as you say, strength and capacity and making sure we're not doing too much but not doing too little is much more important than stretching.
Yeah, agreed. That's great. Thanks for letting me put that to bed, Sam.
All right, Tim, jump in when you need. Next one I want to look at is footwear. Now, if we think about the misconceptions around footwear, it's really led from the footwear industry, because you've got to remember, misconceptions can lead to good sales. And whenever there's money involved, there's going to be an underlying reason for things. So a classic thing I hear constantly is, I got injured because I don't have supportive footwear, or I used to have supportive footwear, I don't wear it now, that's why I'm injured. Another one is, I buy shoes for the cushioning benefits to reduce the risk. So shoes like Hoka, another classic one I come into and contact into in the clinic. So when it comes to footwear, let's be pretty straight on this one. There's no footwear that is going to prevent injuries, full stop. Just as barefoot running is not going to prevent injuries. So does this mean cushioned or supportive shoes, or better or worse for me? Well, it really completely depends on the runner, and some people do require a supportive or a cushioned shoe, but it's, again, a very individual factor. So if we think about a supportive shoe to start with, really what we're trying to do, and what a podiatrist would want to do, is they're putting you in something like a supportive shoe, something with what we call arch support, or that medial posting, is to offload an injury site. So a tendon that's being overloaded, for example, needs to be offloaded to allow it to settle down as we build its capacity in a way that's a bit more structured. So it's good for offloading injury sites, but at the same time, by offloading it, we're moving the force somewhere else. So we have to be really careful when we're changing anyone's footwear drastically that we're actually causing an increased risk of injury somewhere else. So another thing as well with the cushioning shoes, you know, cushioning shoes are great and fine, and things like the Hoka, they feel great, but again, they're not needed to reduce that compressive force because we know there's that same ground reaction force coming through. That said, on the other end of the spectrum, someone running an ultra marathon and doing thousands and thousands of steps is probably going to benefit from a softer heel, so they're not having compression issues around the foot as well. So we know it can be used to offload an injury, but we know that's also a short-term to mid-term strategy. So if you look at some of the research on orthotics, if we put an orthotic in someone's shoe to correct an overpronation, now the foot needs to normally pronate, but an overpronation of the foot, that can be a good short to long-term strategy, but the highest level of evidence shows that that's a really poor long-term strategy. And if you think about why, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take an extrinsic factor of a footwear or a corrective device to change an intrinsic factor of poor biomechanics. So yeah, it might change your biomechanics in the short term. Long term, we need to think about correcting that underlying biomechanics through strengthening and, more importantly, a motor control program. That's going to be a really big factor involved here. So when we look at the research on if we're picking a shoe, what is the thing we need to look at? Now, a lot of people aim for a neutral shoe, a supportive shoe, maybe a minimalist shoe. The research shows us that we actually have to go for comfort. And someone like Chris White at the running company will tell you this. He'll say, what shoe disappears under your foot when you're running? And that in itself is going to be the best way that we can prevent an injury when looking at what choice of shoe we're having. So it's not going to prevent an injury, but it's going to reduce our risk. So with anything, the body needs to adapt. If we're used to a neutral shoe, we stick to a neutral shoe. If we're used to a supportive shoe, we stick with a supportive shoe. We need to correct the underlying intrinsic factors and then slowly move away from them if we're correcting something. And if we're used to something else and it's comfortable, basically stick with it.
Sam, I just turned my video on again to ask a question. Jess Valduto wanted to know if shoe color made any difference. I told her that was an inappropriate question, so we'll move on from that one. But I do really like, I do really like that you brought up a specific running shop. I know you and I aren't getting paid for this. We don't have any sponsors or anything like that. So we can mention those people that we do trust. And up here in Sydney, I certainly have a shoe shop that I send people to all the time. And the main reason that I send them there, one of the guys are really well trained in product knowledge, but they actually let you put the shoes on and go for a run down the path, down the street, you know, probably 50 meters and back. They're very trusting.
Really
but
important.
For me, that simple little thing is really important, where people actually get to try the product beforehand. And while, yes, you can probably go and get the same shoes online, or you might be able to go to another store where they're on sale, I think those type of shops that you and I have built relationships are well worthwhile, because they actually know runners and they don't get as caught up in the brands as, you know, dare I say it, some of the bigger retail chains might.
That's right. And that was the other point I was going to touch on, and this best course of action is actually having that affiliation with one running shoe company, or just being focused on one brand can actually be quite negative, because we're not looking at that comfort element. We're looking at sticking with what we know.
Having said that, Sam, everybody does want to know what shoes you're running in at the moment. So what can you tell us?
At the moment, I need to visit Chris pretty soon by the looks of my shoes, but I'm running in a Hoka at the moment. Again, it is a more cushioned shoe, but I'm used to that neutral plane, and it is the most comfortable for me when trying a large range at a shop.
Mate, you and I couldn't be in any different shoes. I'm running in On shoes at the moment, so kind of one end of the spectrum to the other when it comes to cushioning. So there you go. There's a fantastic example of there is not one shoe that is the perfect shoe out there on the market. It's very much individual.
Very individual. Hellcross will be happy you got those on, mate. So just to recap, basically shoes can be used, and orthotics and things can be used to help manipulate forces in the body and move force from an injury site to another. But we have to be careful with that because that increases the risk of injury in another place. Brand loyalty, I want to challenge that with everyone because everyone's got their favorite brand that they go back to and back to. But shoe companies are constantly changing the type of shoe that they make and the designs of their shoe. So sticking with a brand and having that loyalty isn't always a good option. Find a shoe that disappears under your foot as you run. Now, just as a bit of a touch on point there, we also want to say that shoes wear out pretty quick. So about 800 Ks for those doing long runnings is probably going to need something like 3 to 4 months. For those running, 10 Ks or less, that's obviously a bit longer. But it's worth noting that as our shoe wears, the forces going through our foot and going through our leg are also changing. The body has to adapt, and if it's going to wear out relatively quickly, that's when, again, we can overload. So next one, running is supposed to be hard. And like I said, this is my pet peeve. And if I could break anything down, it would be this one. So classic things I hear all the time. Sam, I would never run like you. It is far too hard for me. Running's too hard on my body at this age. And from the other end of the spectrum of the athlete, I hear no pain, no gain, with the idea of I want to push harder and faster every time because that's how I'm going to get better and beat my opponents. Now, when it comes to running hard, if we look at athletic populations, and there's some really good studies looking at some of the most elite athletes in the world. So looking at Olympic cross-country skiers and looking at elite cyclists. Now, what they did is a longitudinal study, and they looked at all their training loads through the week. And guess how much of them sit in what's called the aerobic zone? They spend 80% of their career, 80% in that green zone, the aerobic zone. So that aerobic zone is a relatively easy zone for people that know the heart rate zones. We've got aerobic, we've got some threshold, and then you've got your high intensity. So green, orange, red. So red is your sprinting, orange is your high, hard, pushing hard and fast, and green is relatively easy and medium, moderate. They spend most of their time there. So this is building their base, and it's the concept again of managing their load and making sure they're not doing too much. They do, of course, blend in the orange and the red training to get their heart rate up. But it's worth knowing for those people doing the 0 to 10 kilometers, that you're getting minimal benefit out of your cardiovascular system. You're not getting that much fitter by pushing super hard into those orange or red training zones and getting the heart rate right up. You're actually better to stick with your aerobic zone, build your base thoroughly over a good 4 to 6 weeks minimum, and then start to incorporate some other factors of threshold runs, faster runs, or maybe some even sprinting if you're up to that capacity. And again, should be gauged probably by a health professional if this is the first time you're starting off. So where did this come from? I think a lot of it comes from people being made to run a bit further than their capacity allows, probably from a young age. And I think anything's hard if you're not used to doing it. Getting off the couch is hard if you're not used to doing it. If we then made to do a cross-country run and we haven't done any running, well, it's going to be hard and you're going to remember that. It's going to suck, and you remember things that suck. So what we need to do inevitably is build up slow. Anything we do is a gradual build. If we look into load management, there's a few concepts there can give you a gauge of how to monitor loads, so how much you're putting through your body, and then how to progress those loads. And there is a bit of science about it, but there's also an art to that comes from either a coach or a physiotherapist like myself or Tim that can gauge that and give you a bit of direction there. So, take home.
Sam, got a question on this one for you. For those people who are starting at low levels, how do, and you know, any running at all might be getting towards the red zone for them. Got any suggestions on making a smooth start if your fitness is particularly low?
That's right. I think that's a really important question, Tim, because this is where a lot of people break down. Basically, I'd look to, rather than kilometers, break your run down into time. So go out for X amount of time, and I'm really looking somewhere between the 10 and 20 minute mark, and starting as that is the standardized time that we go out and do every time we run. Now, this is obviously broken up with rest in between, and that's a really important part, 1 to 2 days minimum of rest. But basically looking, as we're starting that run off, starting at a pace that feels as easy as possible. And it doesn't matter if you're running super slow. You don't need to be running 5 minutes, 4-minute K pace. When it starts to get hard, back it off, start walking, okay? There's no reason why you can't break that run up with walks. Over a 6-week period, we slowly can narrow the amount of walking that we're doing until eventually just running. And that's going to slowly allow our body to adapt and for us to build our capacity over a 4 to 6 week time. So it doesn't actually need to be hard. And then from there, we can add in harder stuff if we want to at a later stage when our body's caught up.
Yeah, I reckon that's very similar, almost exactly the same as the strategy I use with my patients, Sam, and can be applied at any performance level, where as soon as they hit that heart rate zone, or that we use rating of perceived exertion, then just getting them to drop back. So whether that's someone starting off and they're jogging really slowly and dropping back means walking, or whether for someone who's more experienced and they get into a bit of a rhythm and all of a sudden their heart rate's bumped up to a level that it shouldn't be at, just getting them to actively drop their speed back. But I think particularly for those new runners, the concept of walking is a useful one to think about.
That's right. And I think should be integrated for anyone that's starting off, really. For the higher level runner who's had a bit of a base of running, or the athletic population, that's when we need to start taking into account some other ways of monitoring and managing the loads. So this could be things like I've touched on in a previous talk that I'll probably be redoing at a later stage on load management. So things like the acute chronic workload ratio, it's a bit of a mouthful. Using things like Garmin watches to monitor load as well. So they're a really good way of tracking these things. But if we think about it, we want to try and add in as many variables as possible to make the calculation of how much we're doing, to quantify that, and then make sure we're not doing too much, but not doing too little going forward. It all gets a bit complex. So next of all, we've got, I don't need to strength train if I run. And this is a classic one I'm getting at the moment, actually, in the midst of this COVID crisis, calling my clients going, hey, Darren, what are you doing? Are you still strength training? Do we need to think about something to do during this time period if I haven't been in contact with them? And a lot of people turn around and go, no, Sam, don't worry, I'm running. I don't need a strength train, I'm running at the moment. So running's great, but it's not strength training. So I want to kind of bust that myth today. Another one I hear commonly in the clinic that I like to break down is that strength training makes you slow. And I think the idea of that being, we look at someone like a bodybuilder, they're very well built, they've got a lot of muscle, but they're inherently slow. So we straight away kind of link big and strong to slow. But a lot of the research has actually shown that if runners do a strength training program, they don't actually increase their body mass index. They don't increase their weight compared to their height. Okay, so there's no real change there, and I'll dig into the reasons why. So when it comes to athletic population, which is kind of the gold standard, I think, when we're looking at runners and how we can kind of base ourselves off at a scaled down kind of approach, we looked at some of the research of what did they do from a training point of view. And there's some really good research, again, looking into the careers of athletes and especially runners. And in this top running population, it found that up to 10% of their time was spent purely strength training. So if we think of something like running, it's obviously you'd think majority of the time would be running. They're doing a lot of time strength training. Now, 10% of our time, if we're thinking about through, our day-to-day life, is actually a lot of time. So they've figured this out. I think some of the ultra community hasn't quite figured that out from what I've seen. And some top runners still don't strength train, but I'd be really surprised that if they did strength train that they wouldn't actually improve their performance as well. So it's really, really well researched and quite a deep field of research strength training. A 2018 systematic review was a really, really good one. So pretty high level evidence here. And they showed from bringing all these studies together that you can improve your running economy by up to 8% by doing strength training. Okay, so this is the amount of oxygen that your body can consume at any given pace of running. They also include in the study improvements in muscular endurance and flexibility and posture as a side note as well. So really we're touching on all these things that we preach about at Kieser. This would obviously translate to some like increase in your economy. It would also translate to improvements in running performance as well. You can imagine it would drop a bit of time off your 5K PB. And this was actually another study that looked into that. They used a 5K time trial, and they had a bunch of people that did no extra strength training. And they did one group of people who did a 12-week strength training program using things like heavy weights, slow and controlled, squats, lunges, and those kind of movement patterns. And they found that in that time period that they had a 4% improvement in their 5K time trial. So there's improvements in basically your cardiovascular system or your VO2. There's also improvements in running performance. Now, the myth around running and strength training kind of branches off at that stage. And there's a lot of misconceptions around things like type of strength training that you should do, the speed, the repetitions that you should do, what muscle groups you should carry out. Now, if we start by looking at the type and specificity of strength training, we really want to think about what kind of tissues we're trying to act on here. Now, a big bunch of the research has actually concluded that heavy weight is really important with performance improvements in runners. So keeping the muscle under tension was one of the factors. Again, a similar kind of principle we use at Kieser. And their conclusion was around the 2 to 3 minute mark. Keeping that muscle under tension with a heavy load was a way to increase stiffness in the tendon and strengthen the tendon, as well as other muscle groups and other tissues in runners. So this should be, I guess, used as a bit of a protocol. If we think about the amount of forces going through our body, something like the soleus, there's 6 to 8 times our body weight goes through that. So that's the lower part of our calf muscle. So we really want to be doing heavy weights to get these areas, and especially these more tendinous areas like our Achilles, really nice and stiff and strong to react to the forces in running. So heavy weights, keeping that time under tension, 2 to 3 minutes, just basically your Kieser protocol is there. What about muscle groups to target? Now, really when we think about it, we want to target the whole body. Not just the legs are moving, we have a really strong function coming from the core, and that is our base for our leg movement. The arms are driving as we run as well, and this is important for timing of our legs, but also for counteracting the forces of the leg and the core. So really we want to target the whole body when we're looking at it, but we know the legs should be the main focus. So what about the legs? And some studies looked into the glutes and thought, you know, glutes are the biggest muscles in our body. Obviously, these are going to be the main drivers. They help to push our legs backwards, therefore us forwards. And what came out of a lot of this research and compiling it together was that actually calves are king. Calves should be one of our main focuses when it comes to running. And if we look at endurance speed runners, okay, so they're not running a fast pace over a long period of time, that the calf muscle can actually account for up to 50% of the torque generated. So the force generated to propel yourself forward was 50% of it was generated by the calf muscle. And this has been seen to be really important even into the masters athletes, and even more important to the masters athletes, because the increased risk of injury and increased use of the calf muscle through that running cycle. So we want to target lower the muscle groups. We definitely want to target the thigh. We want to target the glute, but we really want to focus on the calf muscle, still making a whole body program. What doesn't strength training correct? So one thing strength training doesn't correct is biomechanics. All right, and I'll just re-emphasize that strength training won't correct your biomechanics. It's an important part to give you the capacity and the foundation to move, but it won't actually change your movement patterns. Probably about 80% of what I work on in the clinic with runners who have knee injuries, ankle injuries, or hip injuries is control around the glutes. In particular, the ones that stop your hip from shifting sideways as your foot hits the ground. So when this is occurring, what's happening is you have a downstream effect of putting extra pressure on your knee in certain points and down further into the ankle as well. So when it comes to this, a lot of the research links into purely strength training for the glutes to correct this, and there was absolutely no evidence that that would correct it. And we see this classically from the chap who's been training for several years on the A3 machine. He's in the AS percentile, but then when I look at his running, he's still shifting out laterally. He doesn't have that control in one leg. And that is a really important factor that we need to couple strength training with a specific and very focused running mechanics retraining or gait retraining in order to get the benefits there. So to conclude, with strength training and running, you really have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Heavy and slow seems to be really effective, and this is as per our training principles. And this is to get all our tissues strong, and especially tendons that we know are really slow to adapt. So all lower limb muscles should be the focus, as well as the rest of the body, but the calf in particular should be a big focus, and you should be really, really strong. This becomes even more important for those who are masters runners. And the big important thing to remember is that it won't fix your biomechanics. That's when someone like me, Tim, Paul Percy, all us other running biomechanics out there who can correct your movement patterns with the strength that you've gained from something like the A3 machine. So to go over some of the myths we've busted today. So we've looked at hard surfaces. So they're not inherently bad for you. Same force on a hard surface or very similar force to a soft surface. There's no direct link between wear and tear and running or running on hard surfaces. Static stretching pre-run does not prevent injuries, and it's not really that useful post-run as well for helping for recovery. That said, mobility, I do believe, is an important factor, and if you're lacking mobility, this could be potentially an issue. Supportive or cushioning shoes do not prevent injuries. So we need to think about the biomechanics and your intrinsic factors rather than trying to use an extrinsic factor like footwear to correct your movement pattern. Running doesn't have to be hard, so it shouldn't be hard and it doesn't have to be hard. If you're making it hard all the time, you're going to get injured. If you're starting off slow and you're not building gradually, again, you're likely to get injured. We need to build very slowly and gradually, no matter if we're at a start point or if we're at a high level of athletic endeavor. And number 5, strength training only has positive effects. Now, the one caveat I would say to that is around DOM and doing too much. And that is around the fact that if you are doing too much strength training, that you are getting a lot of DOM, so that delayed onset muscle soreness that lasts several days, well, that's actually going to affect your training later down the track in the week. So doing too much and getting the DOM effect can be a training error that leads to you not getting the most efficient response from your running training program. So the big three in the literature, and we touched on one of them in our poll, body mass index. Not many people chose that one, but that's actually a big predictor of injury risk. What is your weight times your height? Previous history of injury. Now this is a big factor, and usually because of all the other variables involved with previous injuries. And then we've got training errors, doing too much, too quick, without allowing the body to adapt. These are the 3 big predictors of injuries in the literature. So Tim, I think you're going to touch on some different options and how you can find some help here.
Yeah, Sam, it's going to be a really important part of all of our webinars is that we will give people practical things that they can do. But before we skip to that, there are a few questions that have been asked. So can you, if you can keep that slide up, that'd be great, Sam. A few questions that have been asked, so I want to try and get through a few of those. So question without notice, Sam, and this one was from Hal earlier today. If I've got DOMS from a running session, and so for everyone who hasn't heard of DOMS before, DOMS is delayed onset muscle soreness, and usually you would get it when you're doing an activity that you're unaccustomed to. So if Hal's got DOMS, should he run again while he's still sore, or should he wait?
I believe with that, if you're getting DOMS, and it depends on, I guess, the degree of that soreness, but if you're getting DOMS, that is an indication that you've done a bit of overloading, right? So we don't exactly need that soreness from strength training. And my view would be to actually allow the body to adapt and have a rest period, wait for that DOM to settle before we build into a running again. So really the idea being that we shouldn't be pushing our strength training so hard that it's affecting us later in the week, rather than when should we be doing it within that DOM cycle? But there is probably an increased risk straight after if you've done some heavy loading and then you're continuing to load heavy.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, Sam, particularly if there's enough discomfort that it would affect your mechanics in any way, then I wouldn't run. If there's a little bit of discomfort and you feel like you're still running efficiently, then I'd be quite comfortable. I'd probably want to have a specific chat with you, but I'd be quite comfortable with you running through that. But as soon as it affects your biomechanics, I'd be concerned. Sam, Callie wants to know, if surfaces don't matter, why do I see runners like Mo Farah and probably Eliud Kipchoge could be put into this group as well, running on dirt paths a lot? And she specifically goes on to say like a lot.
So these guys have basically adapted to that. Okay, so their job is running. They're doing a lot of running, and they're running on they can run on different surfaces. Now, I'm not saying running on different surfaces is bad. What I'm saying is if you're not used to this, that's when it can be a risk factor. So Kipchoge, he runs on a lot of different surfaces. He trains a lot, so he's adapted to these and can tolerate them basically.
Yeah, I think running surfaces should be considered like an increase in load. If you've gone from running on the footpath and you go to even a dirt path, that probably you should be running the same volume that week, because it's probably the equivalent of increasing your load because your body is unaccustomed to it. Next question. Well, actually, Hal did note that he's now wearing Nike Vaporflies.
Very nice.
So would all of us be, Hal, if we could afford them or find them. Sam, how much running are you doing each week yourself? That was a question that came through.
Well, like I said, I'm building up at the moment, coming back from an injury. So, I'm using my Garmin to really manage my load with the graph. It's a bit more of a in-depth algorithm they use. But what do I say? So if I calculate myself, running about 30.
All right, and for everyone listening, can we follow you on Strava? Will we find you easily on Strava?
I'm actually not on Strava, believe it or not. Probably need to be.
All right, Sam will be on Strava as of tomorrow, and we'll send out his credentials. Sam, another question we got, any symptoms or signs, and this might be the last question that we go through, any symptoms or signs that you see immediately preceding an injury? So any warnings or hints for runners out there who think, oh, should I push through this or shouldn't I?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And when it comes to these kind of things, there's obviously going to be aches and pains that runners get, and that's normal. What we want to look at, I guess, is potentially pains that hang around is a really important thing. Sharper pains as well, if that's more of an acute onset and comes on and it's a bit more intense, obviously that's it's a bit of a sign of a potential injury. But it's that delay, it's that pain that hangs around and we do other activities in the day and we're feeling pain. Well, that's a bit of an indication. It's maybe a tendon telling you, hey, you're pushing me a bit too far over the last week or maybe even over the last 4 weeks. And I need time to adapt because you're overloading me at this stage.
Guys, we are going to run 1 minute over because we've got a really good question from Melanie, and I do want to make this the last one. So Melanie wants to know, should you run and then strength train on the same day or do it vice versa? Sam, so we'll make this our last question and then I'll just go through options for people after that.
That's a doozy. I want to throw that one back at you, Tim. What's your thoughts on that one?
Well, it depends. I think it depends how many sessions that you're trying to do per week. But I'll tell you, I'll run 4 times a week and strength train 2. And so that allows me to do it not on the same day. Mm-hmm. And if I did ever have to do it on the same day, I would I would never run immediately after a strength training session. So I'm so fatigued after a strength training session, I'd be concerned about my biomechanics and how well and how efficiently I'd run. So if I had to do it on the same day, yeah, I would get my running session done and then I would do strength training after that. That would be my approach.
It makes sense. And I think it's very individual, isn't it? And some people can tolerate, you know, high loads. So they've got used to that. They can used to doing strength training and a harder session on the same day. Some people will look to deload after a heavy strength training session too, to maybe a lighter runs on those days, well, rather than a high intensity one. But it's that's when a little bit of the art comes in, as well as the science, and taking individual characteristics into account and developing a program relevant for you.
Sam, thank you very much for all of your research and preparation in tonight, and for answering everyone's questions, and for putting us on the right path to avoid injuries. As I said before, it's really important to us to give people practical options. So if you're in any way concerned, visit a physio for an assessment, and make sure they're a running physio. We certainly have got a few running physios in our groups. Sam, myself, Todd, Paul, Ema, all really enjoy treating running clients. Joss, JC. Find a physio that does enjoy running, because there are some specifics of being a runner. If at the moment, completely understandably, you're not comfortable coming into a centre, then book a telehealth session. We launched telehealth a couple of weeks ago, and there's 500 people who are booked in for telehealth sessions at Kieser in the next couple of weeks. You can do a one-on-one training session, but number 4 is something that I definitely recommend everyone give a go to. If you want to join the Strong to Run strength training class, email Sam directly and he'll give you the details of that. And for any Kieser clients who are out there, you're certainly more than welcome to train on our Kieser Connect app. You just need to download it, enter your details, or if you've already got it, just update the app. You can do it really, really easily. So Carlo, just as a finisher, I know you've got another poll there. Do you want to put that up for everyone? And we might just, as I say thank you to Sam, put up the poll and ask people a few questions, because this might dictate which topic we go through next. There was definitely a few questions in there about mid-foot striking or heel foot striking. I didn't put you on the spot with that one, Sam. Hal Cross would like to talk about the Vaporfly, and I definitely think the Vaporfly is a very, very interesting topic. I could talk about that one for hours. And there are a few other questions in there that we could definitely do a webinar or a podcast about, maybe at another time. But if everyone can fill in the poll, that'll give us a little bit of insight into what you're looking for next time around. So Sam, I know this is all speculative, but as everyone goes through the poll, what do you think your next event is going to be?
Oh, it's a hard one with what's going on at the moment. I was planning on banging out a few hundreds with the idea of doing a 100-miler in November. There's the Alpine Challenge I want to have a crack at. But I think I'm going to do a virtual ultra for anyone that wants to join me in Princes Park. Obviously with the 1.5 metre distance minimum going on there. But with my friend from Christchurch, we're going to link up and do a virtual ultra marathon, doing a 3K loop.
How many kilometres are you going to do, Sam?
Oh, not sure. We're aiming for upwards of 50 or more. 50 to 70 as a stepping stone.
Around Princes Park, most laps I've run of Princes Park is 8, and I nearly went crazy after that. So you've got me covered, Sam, for sure.
Well, the July Ultra of Princess was cancelled, so I have to do it ourselves.
Carlo, can you display those poll results for us if they're up now? Oh, and so there's a very clear winner in the first question. What topic would you like to learn more about in future webinars? Running techniques. So I'm committing Sam to a running technique webinar. Sorry, Sam. In the coming weeks, we've got a webinar planned for every Monday evening what we might do is we might throw out a second time at some stage in the next couple of weeks, and we'll make sure that running technique is the next topic that comes up. And the second question I asked was, what can your physio help you most with? And that's just a little bit of insight for our physios. And it's really clear there that being injury-free, we know that most runners on average have 2 injuries per year. And so if we can keep you guys injury-free, that's going to be the biggest thing that we can do for our performance. So Sam, we might finish things up there. Anyone who has any more questions, email myself, email Sam's. Email is on the screen right now. If you're interested in the Strong to Run class with Sam, email him about that. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us this evening, guys. Enjoy your running. Stay safe, stay healthy. Anyone wants to go for a run in Bondi, I'm going to run 15 Ks tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. After my 6 a.m. meeting with Brett Long. So send me an email if you want to join in. Otherwise, enjoy, and we look forward to seeing you on the running circuit later in the year. Thanks again, Sam.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.